the sleep of history. The night begins where memory fades. Beyond the noise of cities and clocks, the world grows slow again, a quiet place where time seems to breathe. The air carries the scent of dust, salt, and rain. Somewhere far away, the moon glides over the old stones of the world, touching everything that once was. The deserts of Egypt, the frozen fjords of the north, the silent halls of forgotten castles. Under its light, the past does not vanish. It lingers, soft and patient, waiting to be heard. Imagine the pyramids beneath a silver sky. The wind moves gently across the sand, whispering through the cracks of stone that have stood for thousands of years. The Nile drifts quietly nearby, its surface smooth as glass. The water holds the reflection of a moon that has watched every generation come and go. Nothing stirs except the breeze, carrying with it the faint trace of life. A memory, a breath, a voice, almost too soft to name. Far to the north, the sea rests beneath a shroud of mist. The waves roll slowly, touching the shores of Norway, where the ships of the old kings once waited for dawn. The air there is cold and heavy, filled with the scent of pine and salt. In the distance, the outline of mountains fades into shadow, their peaks hidden by drifting clouds. The wind that crosses them has carried 1,000 stories of voyages, of courage, of silence. Tonight, it carries only calm. Across the land, in a castle of grey stone, a single candle flickers behind a high window. The halls are empty now, yet they still remember the footsteps of knights and the music of lutes. The scent of wax and wood lingers in the still air. It is the 12th century, or perhaps it is no century at all. Just a place outside of time, where every story ever told still floats in the quiet like dust in moonlight. The world rests. The pharaohs have laid down their crowns. The warriors have set aside their blades. The troubadours have silenced their songs. The echoes of their voices drift across the ages, faint, rhythmic, eternal. All of them move now in the same still current, a slow river of memory that flows through night. And you are standing at its edge, listening. The sands, the seas, the castles, they are all around you, woven together in the hush of darkness. Every breath you take seems older than it should be, as if you are borrowing the calm of the centuries. The pulse of history slows, matching your own. Tonight, there is no distance between past and present, no boundary between what was and what is. Only silence, deep, steady, kind. The moonlight folds across the earth like a blanket, and time itself begins to rest. All that remains is the soft rhythm of being, the sound of the world asleep, the gentle drift of history finding peace once more. Part 1. The burden of the divine. The life of a pharaoh. Night rests gently over Egypt. The desert breathes slow and eternal, its wind brushing against the great stones that have watched the centuries pass. In the distance, the pyramids shimmer faintly under the moon, not as monuments, but as memories carved in light. Beneath that same sky, a child is born within the quiet walls of a golden palace. From the moment his eyes open, the course of his life is already drawn, not as a boy, but as a symbol. He is cradled in linen finer than any woven cloth in the land. Around him, the air carries the scent of lotus and myrrh, and the low murmur of servants moving like shadows. The palace glows with oil lamps, their flames trembling against painted walls that tell stories older than speech itself. Every color, every line reminds him that he belongs not only to himself, but to the land, to its river, its stones, its silence. As he grows, the boy learns that his voice must never rise too high, that his gestures must never betray haste. Tutors surround him, men of wisdom, artists, astronomers, each shaping a fragment of what he must become. They teach him the delicate script of hieroglyphs, each sign a world of meaning. He traces them slowly, learning that words have weight, that silence can be a form of rule. Numbers, too, become a language of control. He learns how to measure the flood of the river, how to read the stars to foresee the turning of seasons. Each figure is not mere knowledge, but command, a way to hold balance between land and people, between order and chaos. Outside the palace, the capital hums like a living heart. Priests chant, builders carve, traders call to one another beneath awnings of woven reed. But inside, all is still. He walks along the polished floors where his reflection follows him. Tall, straight, unblinking. Even as a child, he understands that he is being watched, not by eyes alone, but by expectation itself. His days are marked by lessons, his nights by silence. Sometimes he stands at the terrace and gazes toward the horizon, where the desert meets the sky in a thin, trembling line. He wonders what lies beyond the dunes, not in rebellion, but in quiet curiosity. Yet even that thought feels like a luxury. To wonder is to step outside the script. In time, he learns the art of composure. His teachers say that the ruler's face must be as calm as the river at dawn. Anger, joy, sorrow, all must pass through him like wind through reeds. When he speaks, his words must weigh more than stone, yet fall as softly as sand. He practices before mirrors of bronze, adjusting the tilt of his chin, the pace of his breathing, the stillness of his hands. There are ceremonies, endless ones, days of standing beneath the sun, wrapped in linen and gold, surrounded by musicians whose flutes echo like birds in the distance. He stands motionless as crowds chant his name. They bow not to him, but to the idea of him, an idea he did not choose, yet cannot escape. Sometimes at night he hears the city breathing beyond the palace gates, the laughter of workers returning home, the hum of distant drums, the whisper of the Nile moving through darkness. Those sounds are forbidden to him, yet they call to him like memories that never belonged to his own life. He learns diplomacy before he learns affection. When guests from foreign lands arrive, he greets them with rehearsed warmth, his posture flawless, his smile precise. He speaks in phrases carved by advisors, every word shaped to maintain balance. Behind the calm, he feels a faint ache, not sadness, but a constant awareness of distance. The weight of symbols grows heavier with age. Each robe, each crown, each gesture adds another layer between him and the ordinary world. When he touches the sacred objects of rule, he feels their coldness seep into his skin, gold that gleams but does not warm. In private, he studies the faces of artisans, guards, and servants, wondering what freedom might feel like. To laugh without measure, to stumble without consequence.
He never asks. The questions stay behind his eyes, hidden beneath a practiced serenity.
Years pass in slow procession. He learns to walk through halls lined with statues that mirror his own features. Each sculpture captures the same expression, serene, timeless, distant. The artists bow deeply when they unveil them, but he sees in their eyes the faint tremor of exhaustion, the trace of human fatigue that his own image will never show. When he looks at the river, he feels its rhythm matching his own heartbeat. Steady, inevitable. It reminds him that even the calmest waters conceal current. He knows that leadership is not only about command, but endurance. To maintain harmony, he must contain himself. As dawn returns each day, the light enters the palace through narrow windows, drawing thin golden lines across the floor. He follows those lines as if they might lead to an answer. But there is none. The path of the ruler is not to seek, but to sustain. In the gardens he walks among papyrus and palm, the air rich with the hum of insects and the scent of sun-baked earth. He listens to the gardeners speak softly among themselves, their voices carrying an ease that feels almost foreign. For a moment he envies their unguarded laughter, their freedom to exist without meaning. When the tutors depart and the halls fall quiet, he returns to his chamber. The walls are covered in stars painted in gold leaf, and for a moment he imagines that each one might be a life beyond duty, small, unrecorded, peaceful. He breathes slow and deep, as if trying to remember what it means to belong to no one. Outside, the desert cools, the wind shifts, the night wraps around the palace like a patient hand. He closes his eyes and listens. To the rhythm of the river, to the murmur of distant voices, to the silence that fills the space between. And in that silence, for just an instant, he feels almost human. Not ruler, not symbol, not burden, but simply a presence among the ancient stones, sharing the same quiet breath as all who came before, and all who will follow. The burden of the crown. When the boy becomes a man, the golden chamber fills with quiet ceremony. The air trembles with the soft rustle of linen as servants prepare the garments of rule. 2 crowns, one white, one red, wait upon a stone pedestal, their surfaces gleaming faintly beneath the morning light. Together they represent unity, balance, and the vastness of a realm that stretches from desert to sea. When he places them upon his head, the weight is not only of metal, but of history itself. He walks toward the throne, the sound of his footsteps echoing across the polished floor. The hall opens before him. Vast, silent, endless. Columns rise like pillars of the horizon, painted with stories of those who came before. At the end of that corridor of memory stands the seat of rule, carved from dark stone, cold to the touch. He sits not as a conqueror, but as a keeper of order. Around him, the world slows. Each morning begins the same. Attendants dress him in robes woven from the finest fibers, dyed in the hues of sand and sunlight. The cloth bears emblems stitched in gold thread, the hawk, the reed, the curve of the river. They are reminders of the world he embodies, of the fragile harmony he must preserve. When they fasten the collar around his neck, he feels the cool weight settle like a silent promise. He steps into the courtyard, where the air is bright and sharp. The sun rises over the Nile, scattering light across the water. The river moves with quiet patience, its surface rippling like hammered bronze. From its banks, fishermen begin their work, and the distant rhythm of oars reaches the palace in soft waves. He stands still, facing the east, his silhouette framed by stone and sky. This is the beginning of every day, a ritual of presence. The courtyard fills gradually with life, scribes unrolling papyrus, guards aligning their spears, messengers waiting in silence. He listens, not to their words, but to the rhythm beneath them, the hum of purpose that binds all things together. After the first light passes, the council gathers. The advisors enter one by one, their robes sweeping the floor, their voices measured and low. They bring news of trade, harvests, disputes, and the endless pulse of the kingdom. He listens to each carefully, his gaze steady, his hands resting upon the arms of the throne. He does not interrupt. He has learned that power does not always speak. It listens. When his turn comes, he speaks little. A few words are enough. Each sentence carries the weight of decision, shaped by the same care as the carving of stone. His tone is calm, deliberate, like the movement of the river itself. Those who hear him bow not because of fear, but because they understand the precision behind silence. Later, he moves to the writing chamber. There, the air smells of ink and papyrus. The walls are covered in shelves filled with scrolls, the breath of administration. He sits at a low table where the scribes wait, their reed pens ready. When he signs his name upon a decree, the stroke of ink becomes law. The pen, cut from the stalk of a reed by the river, carries as much weight as any sword. He watches the ink dry, its black sheen fading into permanence. The scrolls are rolled, sealed with clay, and carried away to distant towns. He knows that each mark will ripple outward, changing the rhythm of fields, markets, and homes he will never see. In the afternoon he walks through the colonnades where light filters through the stone like drifting gold. Birds move through the air above the pools, and the sound of water echoes softly in the stillness. He pauses beside the statues of his ancestors, their eyes fixed forward in endless patience. He feels both close to them and apart, connected by lineage, separated by solitude. When the heat of the day begins to fade, he returns to the balcony overlooking the river. Below, the city glows in the last light. Children run between houses of mud brick. Smoke rises from cooking fires. Traders fold their awnings. And somewhere a musician plays a slow tune that drifts upward through the dusk. He listens to it without moving. The people below will never know the weight he carries, and he will never know the ease they share. Between them lies an invisible space, not of walls, but of expectation. To rule is to live inside that space, to fill it with stillness so that others may live in motion. As evening descends, the palace grows quiet again. Servants light the lamps, their flames dance upon the walls. He removes the heavy collar and the layered robe, feeling the cool air touch his skin. In that brief moment, without ornament or symbol, he feels something close to freedom, fleeting, delicate, unspoken. But the crown still waits nearby, resting upon its pedestal. Its twin colors glimmer faintly in the lamplight, red for the land above, white for the land below. He looks at it, not with pride, but with understanding. The crown does not belong to him. He belongs to it. Outside, the night returns to the desert. The stars rise like grains of sand flung across the sky, endless and calm. Somewhere beyond the dunes, the wind moves over the river, carrying whispers through the reeds. He stands at the threshold, listening. The palace breathes around him, marble, gold, and silence. The day's noise fades into memory. Soon another dawn will come, and with it the same rituals, the same responsibilities, the same delicate balance between strength and restraint. He closes his eyes for a moment, steadying his breath. The weight of the crown remains, even when unseen. It is not merely an ornament of rule, but a quiet reminder that greatness is not freedom. It is endurance, patience, and the constant act of holding the world together without letting it break. And so the night deepens and the ruler stands in stillness, not as a god, not as a legend, but as a man bound to the rhythm of his land, carrying the quiet burden of eternity in the space between each breath. The burden of the crown. Night descends slowly over the palace, as if the darkness itself understands the need for quiet. The marble corridors lose their shine, the courtyards empty of sound, and the river beyond becomes a mirror of silver light. Servants move like shadows, their footsteps fading one by one until only stillness remains. The day, with all its ceremony and voices, withdraws into silence. He stands by the window where the stone frame opens to the desert. Beyond the walls, the horizon stretches into infinity, a sea of sand shifting under the pale gaze of the moon. The air is dry, carrying the faint scent of dust and jasmine from the gardens below. He leans slightly against the cool stone, feeling its solidity beneath his hand. Out there, the dunes move like slow waves, reshaping themselves with the patience of centuries. Time, he thinks, is not something to be conquered. It is something that continues with or without him. The pyramids rise in the distance, their outlines softened by the silver glow. They have watched countless rulers come and go, yet they remain unmoved, their shadows deep and constant. He wonders if those who stood where he stands once looked at the same stars, tracing the same patterns of light, thinking the same thoughts. The idea comforts him, the thought that his solitude is shared across centuries, that even isolation can be a form of connection. The night wind enters through the open window, cool and weightless. It stirs the curtains and brushes against his face, carrying with it the faint hum of the desert, the whisper of sand against stone, the distant cry of an unseen bird. In that soft current of air, he feels the entire land breathing, the river, the fields, the people asleep in their homes. All of it bound together by a rhythm older than any crown. He removes his rings and the golden collar, placing them carefully on the table beside him. Without the weight of them, his shoulders feel lighter, his breath easier. The garments of power fall away, and what remains is only a man in quiet reflection. The lines of command and ceremony dissolve in the stillness, replaced by something simple and human. The act of being present, of watching the world without needing to rule it. The moon climbs higher, its light spilling across the desert like a tide. The dunes shimmer faintly, and he thinks of them as rivers of time, endless, formless, flowing without pause. Somewhere out there, caravans move beneath the stars, their torches small as sparks. He imagines the sound of their footsteps, the soft creak of leather, the rhythm of hooves pressing into sand. Those travelers live by the pace of the earth, not by decree or ritual. Their freedom feels distant but real, like a faint melody carried by the wind. Inside, the palace is silent except for the faint crackle of a lamp. Its flame flickers and bends, painting slow movements of light upon the walls. The murals glow faintly, hunters, builders, dancers, fragments of a life preserved in colour. He studies them as though they might speak. They tell no stories of triumph, only of endurance. The faces are calm, the gestures precise. He recognizes in them the same patience he has come to know within himself, the stillness required to sustain the world's weight without letting it crush the heart. He thinks of the river again, how it renews itself each season, rising and falling with quiet certainty. Its constancy mirrors his duty, but its freedom stirs something deeper. The river serves the land by moving, while he serves it by remaining still. Both are forms of devotion, though one flows and one endures. Far below, the lamps of the city flicker in clusters like stars fallen to earth. He can almost hear the faint murmur of laughter, the rhythm of drums from a distant celebration. These sounds remind him that life beyond the palace continues without pause, unmeasured, unobserved, pure. For a moment, he envies them not for their joy, but for their simplicity. To live without being seen, to exist without being recorded, that is a kind of peace he will never know. He closes his eyes and lets the night pass through him. In this solitude, he feels no grandeur, no separation between himself and the world beyond. The desert, the river, the people, and the stars all move according to the same pulse. It is a quiet truth, one that no ceremony can touch. When he opens his eyes again, the moon has shifted. The shadows of the columns stretch across the floor like dark rivers. He feels the cool breath of the wind again and listens to its language. A sound without words, yet full of meaning. The desert seems to speak in tones of patience, reminding him that power too is temporary, that permanence belongs only to the rhythm of the earth. He remains by the window for a long time, unmoving. The sand continues to drift beyond the walls, reshaping itself endlessly, the way memory reshapes the past. The pyramids gleam faintly, their edges softened by distance. The river shines beneath the moon like a blade of glass. Everything seems eternal, yet everything moves. In that moment, he no longer feels like a ruler standing above the world. He feels like a part of it, another shape among shapes, another breath within the endless night. The boundaries between crown and skin, between authority and self, dissolve. What remains is presence, silent, unadorned, complete. He breathes slowly, watching the horizon fade into mist. Somewhere, dawn is waiting beyond the dunes, though he cannot yet see it. The stars above begin to pale, their light surrendering to the promise of morning. He stays where he is, not wishing for rest, not longing for escape. Just being. That is enough. For a brief and perfect interval, the burdens of rule disappear. The man who carries the kingdom on his shoulders stands alone before the vastness of creation, unguarded, unjudged. The wind moves through his hair, the moonlight glides over his face, and the world, ancient and unbroken, continues to turn. And in that stillness, he is neither ruler nor symbol. He is simply a man gazing into the quiet distance, a single life folded into the endless breath of time. The Last King of the North. Far to the north, where the mountains of Norway rise sharp against the sky, winter never truly ends. The air there carries the taste of salt and frost, and even the light seems colder, filtered through drifting snow. In a small wooden house near the edge of the fjord, a fire flickers, casting gold upon the rough walls. Beside it sits a boy named Harold, his eyes reflecting both the flame and the sea beyond. From his earliest days, Harold lived among wind and water. The sound of waves was his first song, and the cry of gulls his first companion. The nights were long, filled with stories told by his father. Tales of voyages across endless oceans, of men who carved their names into the wind. Around the hearth, the old ones spoke of honor, of courage, and of the cold silence that comes when the oars rest. Harold listened, his small hands gripping the edge of the table, his imagination sailing far beyond the frozen shores. He grew quickly, his body hardened by labor and weather. The sea became his teacher. He learned to row against the tide, to feel the pull of the current through the wood of the oar, to read the sky for signs of storm. When others sought comfort in the warmth of the fire, Harold sought the challenge of the wind. He trained with the older men, his breath rising like steam in the cold air, as he learned the balance between strength and patience, how to hold a sword not in anger, but in purpose. His people valued loyalty above all things. To them, a word given was stronger than iron, and a promise unbroken was worth more than gold. Harold learned this young, and when he swore, He did so with the certainty of one who understood the cost of silence. As he reached manhood, the land began to feel small. The stories that once filled his nights now called him outward. He longed to see the places whispered of in the hall, cities of marble, markets filled with spices, and rivers that glimmered like silver in the sun. One morning, with the tide turning and the sky clear, he joined a crew bound east. Their ships cut through the grey waves like blades, the sails heavy with mist. Days stretched into weeks, and the cold of the north slowly gave way to the warmth of foreign lands. They travelled through narrow straits and wide rivers, past villages of smoke and song. In Kiev, Harold saw towers of wood taller than any in Norway. There he met warriors of many lands, men who had crossed deserts, rivers, and empires. They spoke of a place even farther south, where the sea turned blue and cities rose from stone. The name of that place was Byzantium. To Harold, it sounded like a word made of light. The journey was long, the rivers narrowed, the forests thinned, and the air grew heavy with warmth. When at last they reached the great city, it dazzled him, its walls stretching high, its harbours filled with ships from every corner of the known world. The markets smelled of salt, olive oil, and strange perfumes. Gold gleamed everywhere, even in the light of morning. Here Harold found his place among the warriors of the Imperial Guard, a company of men known not by birth, but by loyalty and endurance. They were bound not by homeland, but by oath. The pay was high, the discipline fierce. For the first time, Harold saw what it meant to be part of an army that moved like a single thought. He learned new tactics, new weapons, and a new kind of patience.
Yet, in quiet moments, when he stood by the walls at dusk, he thought of home, of the fjords and their still waters, of the snow that fell without sound, of the sharp scent of pine in the morning air. The city glittered, but it did not breathe the way the north did. He realized that no matter how far he traveled, a part of him would always remain among the stones and winds of Norway.
Years passed, and Harold's name became known among the guards. He fought with precision, not fury, earning respect through restraint. Commanders noted his composure, his ability to see what others missed, the small moments that decided battles. But his heart never forgot the rhythm of the oars or the shape of the mountains reflected in frozen water. When he finally returned to the north, he was no longer the restless boy who had once gazed into the fire. He carried the weight of experience, victories, losses, the quiet discipline of men who had seen too much. His homeland welcomed him with silence. The air smelled of home, salt, smoke, and snow. The fjord still gleamed under the same cold sun, and the wind still howled between the cliffs. The people looked to him with a kind of expectation, the way they looked to the sea before a voyage, half hope and half fear. Harold saw in their eyes the same longing that had once driven him away. They needed unity, a steady hand to guide them through the storms ahead. So he stood before them, the firelight flickering across his face, and he spoke with the calm strength of one who had crossed worlds. His words were simple, about the land, the sea, and the duty that binds them. And though he made no grand promises, the people listened. They saw not only the warrior, but the man shaped by endurance, by patience, by silence. In time, he became what the songs would later call the last king of the north, not because he sought glory, but because he understood the quiet burden of belonging. His rule was steady, his voice firm but never loud. He rebuilt harbours, strengthened trade, and brought peace where once there had been rivalry. But at night, when the fires burned low and the halls grew quiet, He would sometimes walk to the edge of the fjord and look out toward the dark horizon. The sea would whisper the same promise it had given him as a boy, that everything moves, that nothing truly ends, and that the wind always finds its way home.
In the reflection of the water, Harold would see not the crown, nor the warrior, but the same boy who once sat beside a small fire in a wooden house, listening to the stories of the sea, dreaming of the endless world beyond.
The Last King of the North. Years passed before Harold returned to his homeland. The journey home was quiet, marked not by the sound of triumph, but by the soft rhythm of waves striking the hull. When the coastline of Norway appeared through the mist, grey, familiar, and endless, something within him settled. The sharp mountains, the cold air, the smell of pine and salt, all of it felt both ancient and new. He had left as a restless youth. He returned as a man tempered by distance and time. The land he came back to was still beautiful, though scarred by years of conflict. Villages clung to the edges of fjords, their lights trembling in the wind. The harbours were smaller than he remembered, but the people were the same. Strong, quiet, their eyes reflecting the endurance of stone. Harold had seen great cities, vast armies, and shining palaces, yet none of them carried the calm gravity of home. He did not seek power at first. He spoke to farmers, shipbuilders, and traders, listening to their stories, learning what had changed while he was away. The people, weary of division, looked to him as if he were the embodiment of the order they longed for. His words carried weight, not because they were loud, but because they came from someone who had lived both the storm and the stillness that followed. Gradually, under his guidance, the land began to knit itself together again. Roads were cleared through forests, linking distant valleys that had once stood apart. New docks were built along the coast, and the harbours filled with the sound of carpenters and ropes tightening under the strain of new ships. Trade flourished. Fishermen brought in fuller nets, merchants sailed farther south, and craftsmen found steady hands again. The markets grew louder, but the noise was one of life, not unrest. Winter came more gently in those years. Not in temperature, but in spirit. People found warmth in the rhythm of routine. Fires in every hearth, laughter in the long evenings, sails folded neatly before the frost. The land seemed to breathe easier, and so did Harold. He ruled not through fear or force, but through the quiet balance of presence. His calmness spread through others, like sunlight through fog, gradual, steady, unseen, until everything glowed with its reflection. Yet even as the kingdom thrived, Harold remained a man of habit. He often walked alone along the docks at dusk, wrapped in a heavy cloak, his breath forming thin clouds in the air. The harbour, to him, was not just a place of trade, it was a memory, a mirror of every voyage that had shaped his life. He would stand where the wood met the water, the wind curling around him, and watch the long ships glide home through the silver light of evening. Their carved prows, shaped like dragons and serpents, moved slowly over the waves. The sea, once his great adversary and companion, now seemed gentler, tamed by time, the smell of salt and tar, the sound of ropes creaking, the low hum of sailors unloading cargo. All of it formed a quiet symphony of the north. Some evenings he stayed there until darkness blurred the horizon, listening to the murmur of the tide against the stones. The people sometimes saw him sitting at the edge of the pier, motionless, eyes fixed on the water. To them he was a figure of composure, a ruler who had brought peace and order. But to Harold, those moments were not about power or pride. They were a return to simplicity, to the feeling of belonging to something larger than himself. The sea had taught him humility long ago, and it still spoke to him in the same slow language of wind and wave. The seasons turned. Spring brought the scent of thawing earth, summer carried the shimmer of light over the fjords, and autumn painted the valleys in shades of amber. Under his rule, Norway grew stronger, but quieter. Not an empire of expansion, but a home of endurance. He valued not conquest, but stability. His people worked, traded, and rested without fear. Villages that once stood apart began to share festivals, songs, and grain. Harold would travel through these places without fanfare. He preferred to walk rather than ride, to listen rather than command. When he spoke, it was with the calm authority of one who understood both the vastness of the world and the smallness of a single life within it. The young admired his strength, the elders his restraint. At the end of each day he returned to the sea. There, beneath the setting sun, he found what no throne could give: quiet. The sky above the fjord turned pale gold, then deep blue, and the water mirrored it perfectly. He would watch until the first stars appeared, until the last sails vanished into the horizon. The wind carried the scent of salt and pine, mingling with smoke from distant hearths. It was a soundless harmony, familiar and eternal. He often thought of the path that had led him here, of rivers crossed, battles endured, languages learned. All of it seemed to have led not to glory, but to understanding. Strength, he realized, was not in conquest, but in constancy, in the ability to keep faith with the land, to listen to the silence between the waves, to hold still while the world moved around you. Sometimes young sailors would approach him on the docks asking for stories of his travels. He would smile faintly and tell them small things, of storms survived, of stars that guided him across unknown seas, of cities that glittered in the heat. But he never spoke of the loneliness that lingered behind those tales, or the longing that never quite faded. He knew they would learn those truths themselves when the time came. As the years deepened, the harbour became his favourite place in the world. The creak of ships, the smell of salt, the whisper of the tide, all of it wove together into a kind of peace that no hall or ceremony could match. Each evening, when the sun dropped low and turned the sea to molten gold, Harold felt time slow. The longships drifted in, their dragon heads glowing softly in the dying light. Sailors' voices carried faintly through the air. The gulls circled above, crying into the wind. The day folded into night, and the kingdom slept beneath the quiet rhythm of the tide. And there he sat, the last king of the north, not as a ruler surveying his domain, but as a man watching the world he had built move gently into stillness. The wind brushed his hair, the sea whispered against the stones, and the sky, vast and familiar, closed around him like an old song returning home. The Last King of the North, Epilogue. Harold was no longer a warrior. The years had softened the edges of his strength, leaving behind not weakness, but calm. His hands, once marked by battle and awe, now rested with quiet purpose. He had fought storms, commanded men, crossed unknown seas, but those belonged to another time. What remained was stillness, and in that stillness, memory. He had become the keeper of an age, a living echo of the world that once sailed with carved prows and burning courage. The people no longer called for war or conquest, they came to him for stories. They gathered near the harbour or the great hall, and Harold spoke with the slow rhythm of the sea itself. He told of voyages beneath endless skies, of men who read the wind like a map, of days when honour was measured not in victory, but in endurance. His voice carried the weight of waves, soft, patient, unhurried. He never sought to glorify the past. Instead, he spoke of its quiet truths, the hunger, the cold, the silence between oar strokes when the sea held its breath. He wanted them to remember that the strength of their ancestors was not in the sword, but in the will to continue when the horizon offered nothing but mist. At twilight, when the harbour turned silver, Harold would walk alone to the water's edge. The wooden planks creaked under his steps, and the air smelled of salt and tar. The ships rocked gently against their moorings, their ropes humming in the breeze. He would stand there, cloak brushing the ground, eyes tracing the thin line where the sea met the fading sky. The wind that once roared now whispered, threading through his hair like an old companion. The ocean was no longer a field of conquest to him. It was a mirror of time. Every wave that touched the shore carried with it a memory. The laughter of sailors, the clash of oars, the soft hum of songs sung to the rhythm of tides. He could almost hear them still, those distant voices woven into the sound of the surf. To Harold, they were not gone. They had simply become part of the sea's great language. When night descended, he returned to his quiet chamber by the harbour. A single lamp glowed beside the window, and beyond it the dark sea breathed. He would sit for a while, listening, not to command, not to remember, but simply to be. The sound of the waves came steady and soft, folding into the rhythm of his breath. It was a lullaby older than any song, sung by water and wind, by the same elements that had carried his youth. Sometimes he closed his eyes and imagined himself again aboard a long ship. The creak of wood beneath his feet, the pull of the oar in his hands, the cold spray of salt on his face. But the vision did not stir longing. It brought peace. He had lived through that world, carried its spirit forward, and now tended it like a quiet flame. Outside, the sea shimmered under the moonlight, vast and endless, just as it had always been. Harold felt its rhythm move through him, a reminder that the past was not gone, only transformed. The world had changed, but the ocean remained the same patient companion it had always been, whispering its stories to anyone willing to listen. And so, as the night deepened, Harold sat by the open window, the scent of salt in the air and the sound of the tide close enough to touch. The waves rose and fell in their eternal measure, gentle and familiar, singing the same song they had sung to him since childhood, the soft, unending lullaby of the northern sea. The Ships of Souls, a Northern Farewell.
In the far north, where the wind moves through fjords like a living memory, there was a belief that a ship was not only for journeys across the sea, but also for the journey beyond it. To those who lived among the cold waters and steep mountains, the vessel was more than wood and iron. It was a companion, a mirror of life itself. It carried not only bodies and goods, but stories, promises, and the rhythm of human endurance.
The people of the north built their ships with reverence. Each plank was shaped by hand, fitted with patience, and sealed with tar that smelled of pine and smoke. The curves of the hull mimicked the waves themselves, designed to glide, not to fight. When a ship was finished, it was as alive as any creature of the sea, made to move, to breathe with the tide.
They believed that every voyage had two directions, one outward, toward discovery, and one homeward, toward rest. A ship could carry a warrior into battle, a merchant across the rivers, a farmer to distant shores, but it could also carry memory back to the earth. It was said that a life well lived should end as it began, close to the sea, close to the sound of wind and water.
In mist-covered meadows and coastal plains, the earth still holds the traces of that belief. Archaeologists have uncovered the long shapes of ships buried deep in the ground, ghostly outlines pressed into soil and clay. The timbers have rotted away, but their form remains, silent and exact. Within them lie the remnants of what once mattered most: shields stacked carefully near the bow, iron helmets, ropes coiled as if ready for use, and tools worn smooth by years of work. There are combs carved from bone, beads of amber, fragments of cloth that once shimmered in firelight. Sometimes there are weapons dulled by time, or wooden chests filled with simple objects: a knife, a spindle, a drinking horn. Each one placed not in haste, but with intention. It is as if someone had paused at the edge of departure, preparing for another voyage, packing not for luxury, but for continuity. The ships rest beneath layers of earth, but even buried, they seem to move. The shape of the hull suggests motion, the promise of forward travel. The prow, often carved in the likeness of a dragon or serpent, points toward the horizon, eternally bound for the unseen. The people who built them did not imagine an ending, they imagined continuation. The ceremony itself was quiet and deliberate. Villagers would gather on the shore or in the open field where the chosen ship had been laid. It would rest upon wooden supports, its bow raised slightly, its keel aligned with the line of the horizon. The air would carry the scent of pine, seaweed, and distant rain. Around it, the wind would hum through the grass, and the gulls would wheel silently above. One by one, objects were brought forward, not offerings, but memories made tangible. The round shield that once hung on a wall, the worn cloak that had braved 100 storms, a sword that had felt both battle and peace. They were placed gently beside the form that would soon return to the elements. These things were not symbols of wealth or power, they were fragments of a life in motion, reminders of labor, laughter, and endurance. The ship would then be covered with planks, soil, and stones. Over time, grass would grow where the deck once caught sunlight. Seasons would pass, and the mound would settle, blending back into the landscape. Yet beneath it, the ship remained whole in its purpose, still pointed toward the open sea, still waiting for a wind that would never fade. To the people of the North, such a resting place was not meant to close a story, but to preserve it. The ship became a bridge between the known and the unknown, between movement and stillness. Even as the years turned and the world changed, the mounds endured, marking the presence of those who had lived by the sea's rhythm. Travelers crossing the fields would sometimes stop and feel the wind that blew across them, a wind that seemed to carry whispers. The sound of oars, the creak of wood, the echo of faraway waves. There is something deeply human in the image of those ships beneath the ground. They remind us that motion is not only a matter of distance, but of meaning. To the Northmen, a ship was never an object of finality. It was continuity shaped in wood. It held the essence of their world, the blend of strength and grace, of courage and humility before the elements. Even today, when one stands among those ancient burial mounds, the air feels heavy with remembrance. The landscape itself seems to breathe. The lines of the ships are faint but visible, like shadows caught in the soil. Each curve tells of craftsmanship, each hollow of intention. It is easy to imagine the builders standing there long ago, their hands raw from labor, their eyes fixed on the horizon, knowing they were creating something that would outlast them. As the northern sky dims and the wind moves through the grass, the silence carries the same rhythm that once filled the long ships at sea. It is the rhythm of oars dipping into water, of sails catching the breath of the world, of lives bound to the tide. The buried ships are not monuments to loss, but to motion, reminders that even when the body rests, the journey continues in memory, in wind, in the pulse of the sea itself. And so the tradition endures in quiet ways. Every harbour, every fishing boat, every voyage that begins at dawn carries a trace of it. The people of the north still build with the same patience, still push their vessels into the water with the same hope that the sea, in its vastness, will remember them. At night, when the fog drifts over the fjords and the stars shimmer faintly above, one might imagine those ancient ships still gliding just beneath the surface, their wooden frames luminous in the deep, their prows cutting through time. The ocean hums softly, and the shore listens. In the hush between wave and wind, the story of the north remains. That to sail is to live, and to return to the sea is not to vanish, but to belong once more to the endless song of water and sky. The ships that endure. The Oseberg and Gokstad vessels. In the quiet halls of the north, where light falls softly on ancient wood, two ships still rest, Oseberg and Gokstad. They have not moved for 1,000 years, yet they seem to breathe. Their curves are smooth and patient, their timbers grey with age but still alive with memory. Once they cut through the cold waters of the fjords. Now they lie beneath the calm glow of museum lamps in Oslo, as if waiting for the tide to rise again. The Oseberg ship was built in an age when craftsmanship was an act of devotion to the sea. Every line of its hull was drawn by hands that understood water, how it moved, how it carried, how it resisted. The builders shaped the wood as if sculpting wind itself, creating a vessel that did not fight the ocean but became part of it. Though the centuries have dimmed its color, the design remains perfect. Its bow rises in a graceful curve, ending in the head of a serpent that once led the way through waves. Along the sides, faint carvings trace the flow of time, spirals, knots, and interwoven lines that seem to move even now, like ripples, frozen in oak. Nearby rests the Gokstad ship. Broader, more powerful, built for endurance, it once carried men across seas through storms and quiet mornings alike. Its form is solid, practical, less ornate than Oseberg's, but no less beautiful. If the Oseberg speaks of ceremony and grace, the Gokstad whispers of distance, of voyages that began before dawn and ended beneath unfamiliar skies. Both ships, though born of different purposes, share the same essence, the union of craft and nature, of motion and stillness. When one stands before them in the museum, the air feels thick with memory. The light is dim, deliberate, not to reveal but to preserve. It slides across the wooden planks, catching every groove, every line of grain. The scent of aged timber lingers faintly, mingling with the clean stillness of the space. Visitors walk slowly, their footsteps hushed on the stone floor, their reflections gliding along the glass that separates them from the ships. There is no sound of waves here, no wind to fill the sails. Yet the vessels seem ready, as if with a single breath they might lift from their cradles and glide once more into open water. Their curves still hold the geometry of movement. Their hulls still carry the memory of pressure, of weight, of rhythm. Even now they look capable of leaving, of sliding back into the element that once gave them life. Children press their faces close to the glass, tracing the outlines with their eyes. Artists linger, sketching in silence, trying to capture what cannot be fully captured, the feeling of time made visible. Scholars take notes, measuring, cataloguing, recording every fragment. Yet what stays in the mind is not data, but atmosphere. The ships are not relics, they are presences. They do not speak of loss, they speak of endurance. Every groove in the wood tells a story, the faint scars of tools, the joints between planks, the iron nails that still cling to the seams. All are marks of human hands, long gone but never forgotten. To look at these ships is to feel the pulse of craftsmanship across centuries. The people who built them did so without drawings or machines, guided instead by instinct and touch. They read the timber the way sailors read the wind, with trust. Standing near the Oseberg, one can imagine its creation, the sound of axes striking oak, the smell of sap and smoke, the ring of iron tools in the cold morning air. Men bent over the keel, shaping, adjusting, testing the curve by eye. Women nearby weaving ropes, dyeing cloth, preparing what would later fill the ship. Fabrics, tools, the small tokens of life that accompany every voyage. The ship was not built in haste. It was a labor of patience, of listening to the wood's own desire to become something more than tree. The Gokstad tells a different story, one of movement and endurance. Its builders made it wide and strong, with deep ribs and a hull designed to cut through rough seas. You can almost hear the sound it once made, the low creak of its frame, the steady beat of oars, the rush of water along its sides. The ship seems to carry that rhythm still. Even at rest, it hums with the quiet memory of travel. In the museum, the air holds a faint echo of that rhythm. The soft footsteps of visitors resemble the slow beat of oars. The lights above flicker like reflections of sunlight on water. Every element of the room seems arranged to remind you of motion, even in stillness. It is as if the entire space breathes with the same patience as the sea. Some stand before the ships for only a few moments, whispering to companions before moving on. Others linger for hours, lost in thought. There is something magnetic about these vessels, not because of what they contain, but because of what they suggest. They are bridges across time. They remind you that the hands that built them once belonged to people who laughed, worked, and watched the same stars that still shine today. The ships are both artifact and echo, proof that beauty can outlast intention. As one moves around the room, the light changes. From certain angles, the ships seem almost weightless, their forms hovering above the floor like shadows of the sea. From others, they look immense, anchored by gravity and history. The longer you look, the more they seem to shift, from object to presence, from past to now. On quiet days, when few visitors are near, the museum feels like a harbour. The air is cool, the light pale and steady. You can almost imagine the faint scent of brine, the distant cry of gulls outside. In that stillness, the ships seem to breathe again, slow, measured, timeless. They remind you that motion is not always visible. Sometimes it exists in the way a thing continues to hold meaning, long after its journey has ended. The Oseberg and Gokstad ships have survived storms of time, the long winters, the decay of wood, the shifting of soil. Yet here they are, whole in spirit, as if they have merely paused between voyages. The oak is grey now, weathered to the colour of ash, but smooth beneath the light. Each plank carries a sheen, not of polish, but of age, a quiet dignity earned over centuries. Modern visitors pass before them as though entering a sacred silence, though no one says so aloud. They lower their voices, not from instruction but from instinct. The presence of the ships commands stillness. They stand as reminders that humanity once moved through the world with hands, not engines, with patience, not haste. When the lamps above shift slightly, their glow ripples along the hulls like sunlight through shallow water. The reflections of visitors, brief, transparent, human, slide across the dark wood, merging for a moment before fading away. In that fleeting overlap, time folds inward, the living and the remembered, share the same breath. Every visitor carries away something different. Some leave with admiration for the craftsmanship, others with a sense of quiet awe. But all, in some way, feel the same truth, that these ships are not simply remnants of another age, they are vessels of continuity. They remind us that movement does not end when sails are lowered, that journeys do not cease when the sea grows still. In Oslo's soft museum light, the Oseberg and Gokstad remain, not as ghosts, but as guardians of memory. Their presence is not about what was lost, but about what endures. The grain of the wood, the curve of the hull, the balance of form and silence, all whisper the same message, that to be built with care is to resist time itself. And as visitors drift past, the ships seem to listen. The air hums faintly, the way it does before dawn by the sea. The light glows warm against the weathered planks. The ships do not move, yet they are never still. They continue their voyage quietly, through centuries, through memory, through the hearts of all who pause before them, carrying still the endless rhythm of the northern sea. Courtly Love, the Songs of the Castle. The 12th century dawned softly over the hills of southern France. The air carried the scent of thyme and wild roses, and the stone castles rose above the fields like grey islands in a sea of green. Within their walls the sound of horses echoed through narrow courtyards, and in the evenings the flicker of candlelight spread across the tapestries. The world was harsh beyond those walls, but inside, for a fleeting moment in history, people began to speak of gentleness, of beauty, and of love. It was here that a new language was born, not of conquest or command, but of admiration. The nobles and poets called it fin amour, refined love, a kind of devotion that asked for nothing in return. It did not belong to the battlefield, though its heroes wore armour. It lived in glances, in songs, in the careful choice of words. It was love as art, as discipline, as quiet endurance. In the courts of Provence, life followed a slow rhythm. The days began with the sound of bells and the footsteps of servants carrying jugs of water through stone corridors. Young knights trained in the courtyard, their swords flashing in the sunlight, their shields marked with bright crests. But when dusk came and the torches were lit, the mood changed. The clang of metal gave way to the soft hum of strings, and voices filled the halls with music. Minstrels, poets and wanderers carried stories from one castle to another. They sang of loyalty and patience, of distant affection and impossible grace. Their songs were not about possession, but about reverence. To love in this world was not to claim, but to honour from afar. The lady, usually of higher rank, became the mirror through which the knight measured his own heart. Her presence inspired his courage, her silence taught him restraint. In the great halls, where banners hung from vaulted ceilings, young men listened to these songs as if to a secret promise. Some would later write their own verses, awkward at first, then sincere, addressed to a woman they barely knew or could never have. They wrote not to win, but to feel. A single look from her, a word spoken in passing, was enough to sustain the imagination for months. The lady herself often understood the ritual. She would smile politely, offering no encouragement beyond courtesy. Her role was not to return affection, but to represent an ideal: kindness, wisdom, grace. Around her, the world seemed to slow. Her gestures became symbols, her words echoes of meaning. She was both real and unattainable, the embodiment of a love purified by distance. Courtly love was not a matter of romance as the modern world would know it. It was more like a discipline of the heart. To love was to serve, to perfect oneself through longing, to find balance between passion and respect. The knight who devoted himself to a lady did not seek her favor in secret. He displayed his loyalty openly, often in poetry or deeds. He would wear her colors into tournaments, speak her name in riddles, or compose songs that only she would understand. In this way, the culture of the troubadours began. Poets who carried the voice of this new emotion from castle to castle through the winding roads of Occitania. Their words blended melody and restraint, desire and humility. They sang that love should refine, not consume, that true affection required distance, that the highest joy was found in longing itself. One could imagine the scene on a summer evening. The hall glows with lamplight, the air thick with the scent of wine and wax. The guests sit along long wooden tables, their laughter quieting as the musician begins. A lute plays a slow, delicate tune. The poet steps forward, his cloak dusted from travel, his voice steady. His song speaks not of triumph, but of waiting, of a knight who has served faithfully, never asking for return, who finds meaning in the silence between glances. The listeners nod, for they understand. To them this is not foolishness, but virtue. Love, when restrained by honor, becomes a mirror of dignity. It turns longing into strength, patience into beauty. It softens the roughness of the world. In some stories, the lady grants a token, a ribbon, a ring, a small gesture of acknowledgement. It is never extravagant, but it carries the weight of meaning. The knight, in receiving it, feels himself transformed, not because he has gained her favor, but because he has earned her notice. That moment, brief as it may be, is the essence of the courtly ideal. Outside the castle walls, the world remains vast and untamed, villages, forests, fields, and wars. But inside, something different grows, a culture of words, of restraint, of inward refinement. It is fragile, yet luminous. It teaches that strength is not only in arms, but in gentleness, that courage is not only in battle, but in the endurance of feeling without demand. Many centuries later, people would call this the beginning of romantic love. But to those who lived it, it was not romance at all. It was a code, a way of shaping emotion into grace. The poets did not write of lovers united, but of hearts made noble by longing. Theirs was a love that did not need fulfillment to exist. It survived in the act of expression itself. Even now, the echoes of those songs remain. The castles may have fallen silent, their torches long extinguished, but the idea endures. That love, at its purest, is not about possession, but about presence. It asks for no promise, no end, no reward. It asks only to be felt, quietly and deeply, like music carried through the corridors of time. And somewhere, in the imagined halls of the 12th century, the scene continues. A young knight at his desk, ink staining his fingers. A lady walking past, her steps measured and light. A troubadour tuning his lute as the first stars appear outside the window. The wind moves through the open arches, carrying the faint melody of a song that will never fade. The song of devotion, of distance, of love made eternal by its silence. The troubadours, voices of gentle devotion. Across the winding roads of southern France, through valleys lined with olive trees and fields of lavender, there once travelled men who carried music instead of weapons. They were called troubadours, singers, poets, and keepers of feeling. Their songs were light as wind and patient as memory, telling of loyalty, admiration, and the quiet ache of unspoken love. They went from castle to castle, their cloaks worn from distance, their instruments strapped to their backs. At each new court, they would pause, tune their lutes, and begin to sing. The words came not from longing for reward, but from the wish to make beauty from restraint. Their verses spoke of the lady's kindness, her calm eyes, the way her voice softened the room. Love, for them, was not conquest or promise, it was attention. In the evenings, when the torches flickered against the stone walls, the troubadour's melodies floated through the halls. The music did not rise loud or triumphant. It lingered like candlelight, warm but distant. The listeners sat quietly, letting the sound fill the silence between them. In those moments, even the hardest soldier could feel gentleness, and even the proudest noblewoman could sense herself turned into poetry. They sang of eyes that met once and remembered forever, of letters written but never sent, of devotion that asked for nothing but to endure. The songs were like fine threads weaving through the air, connecting hearts without ever tying them too tightly. And when the music faded, it left behind something softer than longing, a stillness that felt like peace. Outside the walls the night deepened. Horses shifted in their stables, servants moved quietly through corridors. The wind carried faint echoes of the song across the hills. The troubadour would rest, perhaps beneath a window, his lute beside him, already thinking of the next melody. For him, every journey was the same, a search not for wealth, but for understanding, how to turn emotion into grace, how to make silence sing. When spring came, the castles filled with light and celebration. Banners waved from towers, and fields turned bright with colour. Festivals marked the passing of the seasons, bringing knights and nobles together. On these days, the troubadour's music returned in a brighter form, still tender, but laced with the joy of open air and laughter. In the courtyard, knights gathered for tournaments, their armour gleaming beneath the sun. Around their arms they tied ribbons, narrow scarves embroidered by the hands of the women they admired. It was not ownership, but tribute. The cloth fluttered in the wind, a small sign of devotion, visible yet discreet. The crowds filled the stands, voices rising in excitement. Trumpets sounded, banners snapped, and horses pawed at the ground. But for the knights, the noise faded into distance. Their eyes were fixed on the balcony above, where their chosen lady sat among others, her dress bright against the stone, her face calm. She might smile, barely, a gesture almost too small to see, yet strong enough to carry across the field. That smile was everything. It was courage, approval, grace, all without a word. The knight would lower his visor, raise his lance, and charge forward not to win, but to honour. The clash of shields and the rhythm of hooves became a dance, a demonstration of loyalty made visible. Each movement, each strike, was performed as if the world had narrowed to a single gaze upon the balcony. When the match ended, whether victory or not, the knight would bow in silence. The ribbon on his arm might be torn or dust-stained, but it remained a symbol, a quiet proof that devotion could exist without possession. Around him, laughter and celebration would rise again, but he would hear only the fading notes of the troubadour's song drifting from somewhere in the crowd. As night returned, the castle courtyards glowed with torchlight. Dancers filled the open spaces, and music wove through the air once more. The troubadours sang of what they had seen, of glances shared across distances, of hands raised in acknowledgement, of hearts refined by restraint. Theirs were not songs of victory, but of tenderness shaped by patience. Even in the laughter of feasts, the tone remained soft. Every melody carried the same truth, that love, to be noble, must be measured, that to feel deeply does not always mean to speak. The knights understood this, and so did the ladies who listened. Their eyes might meet across a room, and that was enough. Later, as the festival quieted and the torches burned low, the troubadours packed their instruments and moved on. They left behind not noise but memory, the lingering echo of something pure and fleeting. The people would remember their songs for weeks, humming them in the solitude of chambers, repeating lines like prayers to the heart. And somewhere along the road, beneath the stars, a troubadour would begin another verse. His voice would blend with the night air, steady and low, carrying the spirit of the courtly world wherever he went. That delicate balance between distance and devotion, between silence and song. Thus the tale of courtly love continued, not in battles or grand declarations, but in the quiet music of longing, the sound of knights riding beneath banners, of ribbons fluttering in the wind, of songs drifting from one castle to the next. It was a love that did not seek to possess, only to remember, a melody that still seems to echo, faint and enduring, in the history of the human heart. The echo of the songs. As years turned and kingdoms changed, the songs of the troubadours began to travel farther than their voices could reach. They crossed the mountains into Italy, drifted over the sea to England, and spread slowly through the courts of Europe. What began as quiet verses sung in candle-lit halls became a shared language, the art of speaking gently about the heart. In every land the melodies changed shape but kept their spirit. Italian poets wove them into sonnets. English minstrels set them to new harmonies. Each culture made the tradition its own, yet the essence remained untouched, the celebration of tenderness, patience, and grace. These songs taught that feeling could be strong without being loud, that affection could live in silence as much as in words. Over time, the ideals of the troubadours left the castles and entered the cities, carried by writers and dreamers who found beauty in restraint. Their verses turned into poems, their melodies into stories, their gestures into customs of courtesy. What once belonged to a few noble courts became a quiet rhythm that shaped how people across Europe spoke, wrote, and felt. Even centuries later, their influence endures. The idea that love can be calm and endless, that it can exist without demand or conclusion, remains like an echo in the language of the heart. Those old songs, though softened by time, still whisper the same promise, that tenderness, once spoken, never truly fades. The sleep of history. When the moon spreads its light across the pyramids, when the Nile drifts in silence through the dark, when the northern seas disappear beneath a veil of mist and the castles of France grow still, all stories pause. The world exhales, the noise of centuries fades until only the quiet breath of time remains. Pharaohs, warriors, troubadours, they have stepped gently from their pages, leaving only whispers behind. What once moved with battle and song now rests in stillness, suspended between memory and dream. The air grows soft, the stones of the past seem to breathe, releasing the warmth of the day into the cool of the night. Across the sands the wind glides like silk, carrying the scent of distant myrrh and the faint echo of footsteps long vanished. Over the northern waters fog rolls in waves, folding the ships and shores in its pale embrace. The sea murmurs softly, its voice neither near nor far, a rhythm that has always been. Somewhere, a torch flickers against a castle wall. Its flame bends, steady and slow, painting the outline of forgotten halls. The lute has gone silent, the revelry has dissolved into calm. Even the banners hang still, their colors dim in the pale light. It is as though the world itself has drawn a curtain, allowing everything to rest, to breathe, to become weightless once more. In this quiet, history feels close, not as a record, but as a presence. It moves gently through the air, brushing against your thoughts like a passing breeze. You can almost hear the faint murmur of the past, a hammer striking stone, a horse pacing in the dark, a voice reciting words of love. All of it distant, yet somehow familiar, like echoes from a dream you once knew. Now the body softens, the breath slows, the pulse drifts into rhythm with the steady turning of the earth. The deserts and seas and castles no longer feel separate. They merge, dissolving into one vast stillness. The dunes of Egypt blend with the mist of the north. The sound of the river joins the hush of old corridors. Everything becomes one continuous calm, an endless horizon without boundary. Time loosens its hold. The mind floats through ages, over the pyramids, across the fjords, beneath the vaulted ceilings of silent halls. There are no names here, no battles, no crowns. Only the steady heartbeat of the world itself. Each breath carries you deeper into the quiet. Slower, softer, farther away from thought. The sands cool beneath the moonlight. The river turns silver. The air above the sea thickens with mist, wrapping everything in its patient touch. Even the stars seem to dim their brightness, as if they too have grown drowsy. The night settles completely, not heavy, but kind. And now you are drifting with it. The centuries move around you like gentle waves. The sound of wind and water becomes one with the rhythm of your breath. The weight of history fades, leaving only calm, a calm that belongs to no place, no time, only to this moment of stillness. Beneath the soft darkness, the world sleeps. The Pharaohs' halls, the northern shores, the silent fields of Europe all rest together, untouched and eternal. The night holds them in quiet balance, the way a tide holds a shell. And you too are part of that stillness, breathing with the same rhythm, floating between memory and peace. The stories fade into silence, and the silence becomes its own kind of story. Slowly, gently, the past folds into the present, and the present drifts towards sleep. Everything settles. The air, the heart, the mind are calm as vast as time itself. A night where nothing ends, only deepens,